Here's a quick video for beginners who want to know what some of the basic photography terms are and what they mean. All right, let's get right into it. ISO is one of the three big settings in the exposure triangle alongside aperture and shutter speed. ISO controls your camera's sensitivity to light, at least you can think of it that way. A lower ISO number like 100 or 200 is good for bright lighting conditions or when you're using flash. A higher ISO like 1600 or 3200 increases sensitivity and helps you shoot in lower lighting conditions or when you're not using flash. Now, being able to increase ISO so that you can get usable images in lower lighting conditions is great, but there's a catch. When you dial up ISO, you're also increasing digital noise. That's those grainy specks in your photos. Now, with modern cameras, noise from using high ISOs is a little less of a problem than it used to be, but it's still something to consider. Now, remember, ISO isn't the only way to deal with lower lighting conditions. Sometimes you'll want to use adjustments to aperture or shutter speed, or all three of those exposure settings in combination to strike the right balance. Now, aperture refers to the opening in your lens that lets light into your camera during an exposure. It's measured in f-stops like f2.8 or f5.6. Now, a lower f-stop number means a wider aperture, allowing more light into the camera. A higher number means a smaller aperture, letting less light in. The cool thing is that aperture doesn't just control the amount of light coming in, it also affects the depth of field in your image. So a wide aperture, meaning a low f-stop number like f2.8, creates a shallow depth of field, perfect for portraits where you want that beautiful blurry background. A narrow aperture, which is a high f-stop number like f16 or f22, gives you a deeper depth of field like for landscapes when you want everything in focus. Shutter speed controls how long your camera's sensor is exposed to light when you take a photo. It's measured in fractions of a second, like 1/200th of a second or 1/60th of a second. A fast shutter speed, like 1/1000th, can freeze motion, which is great for sports or action shots. A slower shutter speed, like 1/15th of a second, can capture motion blur, if that's what you're going for. But just like with the other two main exposure settings on your camera, aperture and ISO, shutter speed also affects exposure. So slower shutter speeds means the shutters open longer, which lets in more light. Good for low light situation. But be careful because real slow shutter speeds can result in blurry photos. Now here's a quick tip. If you're hand holding your camera, use a shutter speed equal to or faster than the focal length of your lens. For example, if you're using a 50mm lens, stick to at least 1/50th of a second for shutter speed. Now personally, I'd go for shutter speeds even faster than that if I'm trying to avoid blurry shots. If you'd like to really get a handle on the fundamentals of photography and you'd like to learn all about flash photography for portraits, you should check out Ed Vorosky's Guide to Flash Photography. This is a comprehensive 80-page guide that will help you become an expert with flash and exposure. I've also got a course called Flash Photography for Portraits that's helped thousands of beginners go from the basics to pro-level flash portraiture quickly, all without the fluff and at a very reasonable price. Check it out. The links are in the description below. High-speed sync is a flash feature that lets you use shutter speeds faster than your camera's flash sync limit, usually around 1/200th or 1/250th of a second, depending on the camera. And this is important because in bright conditions, like with outdoor portraits, you might want a combination of a wide aperture for nice background blur, but you're using full flash to help pop some extra light onto your subject. For this, you're going to need a fast shutter speed so that you don't overexpose your background, but that speed might not work with your camera's normal flash sync speed. With high-speed sync activated, you can go way past the normal flash sync limit and shoot at speeds like 1/1000th or even 1/8000th of a second if you need to. So with high-speed sync, you're not limited by that normal flash sync speed and you've got more creative options for your aperture and shutter speed combination. Now here's a tip. With many flash units, you can just leave the high-speed sync setting on and it'll activate automatically if your shutter speed exceeds the normal sync speed. TTL, which stands for through the lens metering, is a mode on some flash units and strobes that automatically adjusts the flash power based on your camera's exposure settings and the scene's lighting conditions. So here's how it works. When you press a shutter, your flash fires a very quick test flash, and your camera measures the light coming through the lens and tells the flash how much power to use for the actual exposure. Then the actual exposure starts, the flash fires again with the correct amount of flash power for the shot, and you should get a fairly accurate exposure. This whole process happens so quick that you might not even notice that there are two bursts of flash. Now, TTL is good for fast-paced situations where you don't have time to mess with manual settings. Just remember, TTL isn't perfect. It can make mistakes, but you can always tweak things with a little setting called flash exposure compensation. And that's something we'll talk about in another video. Focal length tells how much of your scene your lens captures and how magnified the subject appears. So wide-angle lenses capture a broader view, making making them good for landscapes and architecture. Telephoto lenses like a 200 millimeter really get in tight so you can do things like get good headshots even if you're several feet away from your subject. Focal length also affects perspective. A wide-angle lens exaggerates distance, making objects appear farther apart, and a telephoto lens compresses distance, making objects appear closer together. Now, usually you want to match your lens to your subject, so go wide-angle for big scenes and telephoto for portraits or distant subjects. Now, these aren't hard rules, so don't be afraid to experiment and make sure that you try out different focal lengths in different situations. Field of view refers to how much of the scene is visible through your lens. Now, it's influenced by your lens's focal length and your camera's sensor size. A wider field of view captures more of the scene, while a narrower field of view focuses on a smaller area. Now, here's the connection. Field of view works hand in hand with focal length. So a 50 millimeter lens on a full-frame camera has what we call a standard field of view, which is close to what the human eye sees. On a crop sensor camera, that same lens gives a narrower field of view, almost as if you've changed the focal length of your lens or you were zooming in. Now, why does this matter? Understanding field of view helps you compose your shots better. If you want to capture a wide landscape, use a lens with a short focal length and a wide field of view. If you're shooting a portrait, a longer focal length with a narrower field of view can help isolate your subject and create that nice background blur. Hey, I hope you've learned something today. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment. I'll see you next time.